Hello everyone, Matt here with thevirtualinstructor.com, and in this lesson we're going to take a look at creating a realistic drawing of a couple of cherries using alcohol-based markers and colored pencils. We'll use the alcohol-based markers as somewhat of an underpainting, and then over the top we'll apply the colored pencil applications to develop the details and broaden the range of value and contrast. If you enjoy this video, then I encourage you to check out our comprehensive membership program, which includes video courses on drawing and painting, ebooks, weekly live lessons, our weekly critiques as part of the Members Minute, and a year-long curriculum for visual arts teachers. If you want to learn more about our program, just visit thevirtualinstructor.com/members. You can also check out 3 of our course modules for free. Each one of the course modules includes an instructional video and a downloadable ebook. All you have to do is click on the link in the corner of the video or click on the link in the description below. With that, I hope you enjoy the following lesson. We'll begin with a contour line sketch using an H graphite pencil on marker paper. Then we can begin applying our marker applications. We'll create somewhat of an underpainting for this particular drawing using the markers. Over the top and later in the process, we'll begin applying colored pencil applications. The marker applications allow us to apply broad applications of color very quickly and loosely. The colored pencils will provide us a level of detail and increase the contrast and intensity of the color. We'll start here with a medium red. In this case, I'm using carmine red, and I'm using a Prismacolor Premier alcohol-based marker. When we make these applications, we want to make sure that we still leave areas of strong highlight. We'll allow the white of the paper to show through in this case. Even though some of the colored pencil applications will be able to cover some of the marker applications, for the intense highlights, it's best just to leave the white of the paper showing. We'll make directional strokes that flow over the cross contours of the form of each one of the cherries. Once we have our initial applications using the carmine red in place, we'll start addressing some of the mid to lighter tones. Here we'll use a blush pink and a bit of pale vermilion to address the middle and lighter values that happen near and around the highlights. Once we have some of these lighter tones in place, we can begin pushing some of the darker values. Of course, we want to create a full range of value in the drawing. Value, of course, is the darkness or lightness of a color. We understand the form of objects and the light within the scene, as well as the texture of objects based on the positioning of different values. You can see here we're starting to darken the values using a crimson red. Here again, we're making directional strokes that flow over the form of the cherry. Many of these strokes will be covered up with our colored pencil applications, but it's still important to constantly consider the form of the object as you're making strokes with any mark making tool, whether that be a marker, a pen, a graphite pencil, or a brush. Of course, the positioning of the values is all dependent on the location and intensity of the light source. The light source, of course, is the area or location where the light is originating within the scene. In this case, our light source is originating directly above the cherries. This is producing areas of strong highlight on the upper portions of the cherries and strong shadow on the bottom portion of the cherries. When we're making marker applications, it can be difficult to create gradations or slow changes from colors and values. For this reason, I'm creating somewhat of a dotted pattern around these areas of transition. This helps to ease the transition of value from one location to the next instead of adding a hard line. When we go back with our colored pencil applications, we'll be able to smooth out these transitions of tone and value. Now we'll start darkening some of the values that we have in place using a few neutrals. We'll start here with 20% warm gray. This application is applied mainly to the entire body of both of the cherries. We'll also use this color to establish the shapes of the cast shadows underneath both of the cherries. These applications appear very light, and they should be. We'll gradually make these values darker. We'll continue on pushing the range of value a bit further by further establishing some of the darker tones and values. We'll switch over now to a 50% warm gray and apply this marker directly over the top of the areas of darker value on both of the cherries. Since this is a neutral gray, you'll notice that it affects mainly just the value of the color. we still perceive the color as being red, just a darker version of it. As we broaden the range of value, the form of the cherry starts to make a bit more sense. We're also starting to understand the texture of the cherry as well as the direction of the light source. We'll add a bit of the 50% warm gray to the area of cast shadow underneath both of the cherries as well. We won't allow this application to extend all the way to the edges where we applied the 20% warm gray so that we can have a bit of a transition of tone and value. Typically, the areas of strongest shadow and an area of cast shadow are just underneath or directly underneath the object. Now, in a few areas, we'll add a bit of 70% warm gray. You can see that this is the darkest of the grays that we have used, and it's making the darker values much darker. Of course, throughout this entire process, we should be very patient with our drawing. We shouldn't expect our drawing to just miraculously appear with a few marks. So you can see here we're taking a very layered approach to applying the markers, and we'll do the same with the colored pencils in a moment. At this point in the process, we've established a fairly broad range of value, but the transitions between values is rather stark and the appearance of the drawing is rather splotchy. We need to ease the transitions between values a bit. To do so, we'll go over most of the body of both of the cherries using a poppy red. This will help to unify the values and colors that we have in place. It may be important to remind you that I'm using alcohol-based markers for this particular drawing. Most markers that you come across are water-based, and as a result, they're quite a bit more opaque than the markers that I'm using here. The alcohol-based markers allow us to layer applications like we see here, and by layering applications, we create more depth in the color, and when we have more depth in the color, it leads to a greater representation of what we actually see in reality, meaning that we're going to have a more realistic drawing. For the areas of lighter value, we can ease the transitions using a peach. Now we're ready to start addressing the underpainting for the stems. We'll start by covering most of the body of each one of the stems, again leaving out areas for highlight, using a lime peel marker. It's worth mentioning here that you may notice that the markers are not bleeding like what you would expect with typical drawing paper. This of course is because I'm working on marker paper. This paper has a surface that's conducive for accepting marker applications, but other materials can be applied to it as well, as we'll see in a moment with the colored pencil applications. Once we have the yellow-green base application in place, applied with the lime peel, we can go back and start developing some of the browns. For this, I'm using the marker dark brown. Along the base of each stem, we'll pull vertical strokes down that flow along the form of each one of the stems. Then over the top, we can add a bit more strength to our yellow-green by applying a chartreuse marker. To add a bit more variety to the color and to add a little bit of warmth, we'll use a cream marker in areas. Then we can start darkening up some of the values on the stems, mainly at the bottom portion and the top portion, using a 70% warm gray. This is the same marker that we used to portions of the shadows on the body of both of the cherries. Now our underpainting is in place and we're ready to start making colored pencil applications. I'm using Prismacolor Premier colored pencils for this demonstration. These wax-based pencils are soft and buttery and can be applied in multiple layers to build up rich applications of color. We're starting here with a bit of Tuscan red, mainly addressing some of the darker locations. We're going to be working mainly from the left side of the picture plane to the right side of the picture plane, slowly developing an area at a time. Here I'm going back with a bit of peach to start applying some of the lighter tones and values. You'll see this process continues, pushing darker and lighter values until we have an even broader range of value and tone in the drawing. Early on, the applications are relatively light, but as we make additional applications, we'll build up the amount of colored pencil material on the surface, which will lead to a more natural and realistic appearance. To ease the transitions from light to dark, close to the highlight, we're using a bit of salmon pink. Then we can use white to strengthen some of the highlights, mainly on the upper portions of the cherries. These strong highlights don't just exist on the top portion of the cherries, but also extend down the right side of our left cherry. Now it's back again with the Tuscan red, making some of the darker values a bit stronger. The colored pencils do a fine job of easing the transition from light to dark, where we see strong edges that were applied with the markers. So in essence, the colored pencils help to soften these transitions. We'll progressively get a bit heavier with our applications as we begin to build up wax on the surface. As you can see, the process of developing a colored pencil drawing, even with the marker underpainting, requires a certain level of patience. We have to be prepared to apply multiple layered applications of colored pencils in order to produce realistic results. This requires a bit of time and attention. Of course, this process is no different from any other form of drawing. We're relying on what we observe, and we're taking this information and applying it to our drawing. Now we'll begin making the color a bit brighter with an application of crimson red. This crimson red is a brighter red. As you can see, some of the colors underneath still show through. Again, this creates additional depth in the color, which ultimately leads to a realistic appearance. By using this crimson red to go over the top of some of our peach and white applications, the colors actually mix, producing a lighter version of the crimson red. Here again, we can use the crimson red to ease transitions from some of the darker tones to some of the midtones and even some of the highlights. Now it's time to do a bit of burnishing. Burnishing is the act of working the material into the tooth or texture of the paper to create a smoother, more even appearance. Here I'm using what's called a colorless blender to do so. A colorless blender is basically a colored pencil with the waxy binder inside of it, just void of any pigment, so it's a colorless colored pencil. Using this pencil, we can go over the top of the colored pencil applications in place, eradicating a lot of the texture that's produced by the texture of the paper. Now we'll go back and make some of the darker values a bit stronger, increasing the contrast. Here I'm using a dark umber to do so. There are a few orange undertones that exist on both of the cherries. To add this orange undertone, we'll use a mineral orange pencil to add a bit more warmth in areas, mainly around the areas of highlight and middle values. As we get a better idea of the contrast and values in place, we can go back again with our Tuscan red, making some of the values a bit darker and easing transitions between light and dark a little bit further. Then we'll go ahead and move on to our second cherry. We'll use the same process and the same ordering of pencil applications as we did with the first. We'll start with a bit of Tuscan red, developing many of the middle values and dark tones. You can see here with this application will allow some of the red underpainting that we developed with the markers to show through. We can also refine areas of highlight and again ease transitions of tone and value from light to dark. Then it's on to our second pencil, light peach, and we'll begin developing some of the highlights and lighter values. The applications at this stage will be quite a bit rough and we'll see the texture of the paper showing through. But remember, we'll go back in a few minutes with additional applications of colored pencils and the colorless blender to smooth out these applications. We'll address some of the more orange tones using the salmon pink, especially around the areas of highlight and lighter value. Then it's back with the crimson red, making the color a bit brighter. This color also helps to unify the colors that we have in place. Here again, we can go right over the top of some of the applications that we've made with the light peach to create a lighter version of the crimson red. We'll again use the white to strengthen up the highlights. And then again, we'll use the colorless blender to burnish these applications into the tooth of the paper, creating a smoother, more even appearance. Again, dark umber is used to strengthen the darker values, increasing the contrast and broadening the range of value within the scene. Since we have a few water droplets on the cherry, this dark umber does a great job of increasing the strong contrast that we see here. We're of course using dark umber here instead of black because black can tend to make a drawing look unnatural, but the dark umber is a warmer yet darker color, so it works well with the warmer reds and oranges that we find on the cherry to develop the areas of shadow. You can see here at this point, especially in the body of the cherry that we're working on at this moment, that we've got quite a variety of different tones and values. All of them are different versions and values of red, but they really work to create the illusion of texture on the cherries. We'll continue working with our selection of colors. In this case, we're using a bit of the mineral orange to add that orange undertone. Now we're ready to start developing the colored pencil applications on the stems of both of the cherries. We'll start here with an application of lemon yellow. The application here is medium to heavy. Then over the top we'll use a bit of green ochre. This green ochre color is very natural, and it's a darker version of green. This will allow us to push some of the darker tones and values that we see on the stem while sticking within the family of green. This color does an excellent job of broadening the range of value and increasing the contrast, but it also allows us to use it to define some of the edges of the stem. I'm not encouraging you to outline the stems here, but we can further define some of the edges here and there. Now we'll add a bit of warmth using a bit of burnt ochre. This lighter brown color is used in moderation in just a few areas along the stems. And here again, we'll use a bit of dark umber to strengthen up the shadows. Now we'll go back to the cast shadow underneath the cherries. Here we're going to use a bit of 50% warm gray to make the shadow a bit darker. Over the top, we can make colored pencil applications to smooth the transition of tone and value. We'll start with a bit of 20% cool gray. Then in the area of strongest shadow, we'll use just a bit of 50% cool gray. Then it's back to the bodies of the cherries using a scarlet lake. This final red will help to further unify the drawing. And now our realistic drawing of cherries using markers and colored pencils is complete. If you enjoyed this video, then I know that you'll enjoy being a member at thevirtualinstructor.com. Our comprehensive membership program includes video courses on drawing and painting, weekly live lessons, ebooks, lesson plans for teachers, weekly critiques, and much, much more. To learn more about our program, just visit thevirtualinstructor.com/members or click on the card in the upper right-hand corner. And if you want to check out 3 of our course modules for free, you can do so. Just click on the link on your screen now. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.